I'm Bethany.
And I'm Lauren.
Welcome to the Healing Collective podcast, where we explore the paradox of healing at the individual and the collective level.
Join us as we invite guests to share their personal paths to freedom.
Welcome to the pod, guys.
Thanks.
I've been looking forward to this one. I have a real, like both of us, Lauren and I, have become somewhat obsessed with astrology over the last year-ish or whatever, year and a half maybe for me. And it's definitely something that I use in my own practice day to day. There's lots of things we talk about on the pod that I don't necessarily use all of the time, but I pay more and more attention to it. And working with Drew here for the last, 9 months or so, I got really excited. You guys are the first astrologers we've had on the podcast. And Cameron, I've heard so much about your work and heard you on other podcasts. So I was really excited that you guys were friends and willing to do this together with us.
Yeah,
anything you want to say?
Yeah, real life friends, which is kind of rare these days.
Seriously, yeah.
We actually met in person before we met online. So.
Yeah.
That's true for Lauren and I too. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Did you guys meet at some of the astrology?
Honestly.
This is gonna be hard. Did you guys meet at the astrology conferences, like at some of the different meetups and stuff like that? Is that where you guys met and know each other from?
Yeah, we met in 2019 at NORWAC, which is the astrology conference in the Seattle area. Nice. Cameron was talking to two astrologers who like from the Bay Area, or they were in the Bay Area at the time at least, Sabrina Monarch and Gemini Brett. And they were all chatting, and I was going to this conference. Like, I had not really been involved in the community at all at that point, and I was just amazed at how like willing to talk everybody was, and how like not it was so kind of organic and nice to just chat with people about stuff. And Cameron and I got to talking about like Jupiter and Saturn and the way that the glyphs, like the symbols for Jupiter and Saturn, are kind of like reversed. And it was just Cameron was just so generous with his knowledge, and we kind of hit it off from there.
Yeah, definitely hurting out that day. Yeah, because if I get people in person and like have presence, oh yeah, I can really like give a good transmission. Yeah. And yeah, Drew just always has this aura about him too. So that was nice that he came through.
Mm-hmm.
NORWAC. I miss being in person.
Yeah, seriously. But we were able to do some stuff in Oakland last summer, meeting up then, right around the time that I met Bethany, actually. And yeah, so we've kept in touch.
Indeed,
literally.
Lovely. Well, thank you for sharing yourselves and your friendship and with us on this pod. Is there anything you want to say?
Have you all introduced yourselves by rising, sun and rising signs? Like, have we done that?
Well, we were getting into it a tiny bit. Drew and I said how we're both Scorpio risings, but no, that's fun. Let's do that. So, and I don't know if we've even gone into like all of sun, moon, rising. I think we've done a little sun. We've mentioned our sun astrology, sign astrology on this pod. But so I'm Scorpio rising, Taurus moon, and a Leo sun.
I can go. I'm a Leo sun, Pisces rising, Aries moon.
Mm-hmm.
That's right. I remember that now. I'm a Leo moon, Scorpio rising, Aries sun.
And I'm a Sag rising, Aquarius sun, and Gemini moon.
Oh wow!
Fire air in the house here.
All right.
Lots of fire. Amazing. Well, maybe you can just start, if you don't mind, telling us a little bit about your astrology practices and the other things that you do. I know, Cameron, you do a lot of herbal work as well, which, P.S., I'm interested in general around healing, but just so you know, I work in the natural products world, and I'm on like the American Botanical Council Board of Trustees and the American Herbal Products Association Board. And I do a lot of like conservation and sustainability work around herbs. So I have like an extra peak interest in all of that, at least that aspect of those things. So maybe Cameron, if you don't mind to start, but just tell us a little bit about yourself and your practice.
Totally, yeah. So, as you said, my name is Cameron, and my practice started out here in Memphis, Tennessee. I was working at like a facility for youth, like troubled youth, and I used to just go to a spiritual supply store, and I would always go get Moldavite and go do like meditations in the store, and I would like be helping people in the store. So one day they like asked me to just apply. So I applied for there, and then I started working there, and I didn't know anything about herbs really. I didn't know anything about astrology really. And I just started asking everybody questions and nobody had the answers. So I went to go find the answers myself, as the Gemini moon does. And so I just started picking up books from the store. And I started out with magic first, like just reading like different correspondences with magic and stuff like that. And yeah, but really I was working with herbs first. So the herbs brought me to the planets, and I started like learning about like, well, this herb goes with this planet. And so I just was working like that. And it was a trial and error process when I first started. So really when I was working with herbs in the shop, it was just like I was asking people questions. They were telling me what they thought. And then I just started picking up books. And then every day, like, I don't know like what happened, but in like 3 months, like I started having people just coming in, asking me questions about like what herbs they needed to work with. And around that time, I started really getting into like a deeper practice of like just drinking tea every day. And passion flower was my first, is my first plant. And so one day I was drinking passion flower, and I went to sleep, and it told me to go to Oregon. And the next morning I woke up, and then I saw a conference. It was in Portland, Oregon. So I went there, and then I started like really, really diving deep. And ever since then, for the last 4 or 5 years, I was working in the herb shop, and just every day, 40 hours a week, like not every day, all the time. It was like 5 days a week, 40 hours a week, just like literally as if I was a cashier sometimes, like back to back to back to back people. So I literally got to like have this embodied experience of astrology where it's like, and for a long time, I was just like, what's your sun, moon, or rising? But most people only know their sun sign. So I got to really see like true patterns of like, well, what does like even talk about like a healing of the collective is like, well, what does this sun sign need on this planet? Because I just met 50 of them in the last like 2 weeks, and they all have like this similar thread. So that's how my practice built up. And then within the last 2 years, I don't know what happened, but it like exploded online somehow. So now mostly I just practice here at my house, and yeah, so I've just been doing that. But a lot of things have moved way more to astrology rather than herbalism. But people here still in town, I work with them with herbalism, but I also do energy work, and I also like help people correct their posture. Like I work with some elderly people and like work with like posture changing things, and then like also like helping people be like, oh well, this is your hip, and this is the emotion that goes with that, and it's on your left side, and blah, so I do little things like that too as well. And Kundalini teacher training still, because I have to wait till the next cycle comes. So I'm doing that. I'm doing a lot of stuff. So yeah, that's what I do. In general though, lately I've been doing like a lot of holistic health consultations, just looking at the chart, and, people think that they're coming to me specifically for like medical astrology. And that is kind of what I'm doing, but also it's just like showing the different layers of like how the emotion goes with the physical body, with the psyche, and then with the spirit of the soul is asking of the person too as well. And that's been really powerful. So yeah, that's a little bit.
It reminds me, thank you for sharing all that. It reminds me of one of the people who taught Lauren and I to coach. He talks about at bats. And my story is like she's had so many at bats and just because I know now, because I've been learning astrology from you. There's one thing to like learn the facts, like learn all the tools and learn what things mean. And there's another thing when you know somebody who embodies that, you like never forget it. You get this like experience of what's being taught. So my story is that you got to have so much experience of how this stuff was playing out in such real time that sounds like you probably really were able to sharpen your sword pretty quickly on.
Yeah. it's actually just been like the last 2 years that I've actually like learned like hard-nosed techniques. And before that, it was just like, I guess some people would call it intuitive, but to me, it was just like data. It was like I just had so much data that I was just like, this goes with that. This goes, just like pattern recognition. So yeah, definitely a lot of at bats.
Well, and probably balancing the polarity of the data and like the mercurial side, and just looking for all that information, with the fact that the first flower you worked with, passion flower, you had a dream, you woke up, you decided to go to Oregon, like boom, like, so the fact that you have all that instinctual stuff and that intuitive stuff, and that you're layering all this other stuff on top of it, that's exciting.
Totally.
Yeah, that's
Well, even when, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Lauren.
Well, when I feel into you energetically, your field is so open and there's so much flow there. And my experience of it sometimes is like data or like binary code comes through the field. And the more clear you are, the more you're just translating the field. And so when I feel into what you're saying, it feels like you just have a really clear channel to the field. And you translated it, and then later you found like, oh yeah, this exists in a book somewhere, or this is a tool, and I can relate to that.
1,000%, yeah. It's so true. I needed astrology to like be able to communicate, really.
Right.
It really was this experience in the field, and then it was like, oh, now I have these words, and people think these words are cool.
Yeah.
Well, I feel like that's the Jupiter experience, right? Like Bethany, you were saying how you have like the data and like the facts, and you have all the learning that has to happen to be able to communicate with astrology, which is very much that Mercury side. But then you have this other kind of Jupiterian side, which Cameron is a Sagittarius rising, and like Jupiter in Cancer, it's all about like tuning in at that truth level and that experience and that embodiment level. Yeah, just thinking about that kind of Mercury Jupiter axis. It's so cool.
Drew, why don't you tell us? Oh,
yeah, I was gonna say, I feel like Lauren and Cameron are gonna have a lot of like similar thing, like both channeling stuff and having your own.
I love how you do your hands like this.
When I think about Lauren, I'm like,
this is Lauren. This is Lauren. I'm like, I don't know how I feel about that, but okay.
It's like you know what it is? It's your fingernails. It's me. This is me being you, because you always have like long fingernails that are really, and I'm just like, when I think about you talking, you do this when you talk, especially when you're like looking through, like literally
I'm
getting
like blushing. I'm like literally like, okay, Drew, let's hear about you.
Drew. Let's hear about you.
Yeah. So, I do astrology too. I guess I've been at it since I've been like into the esoteric for my entire life. Like I was kind of raised on a, mental diet of new age mysticism and like popular quantum physics and like manifestation and all that stuff. That was kind of, getting popular in like the mid 2000s. And that's when I was like, growing up with my mom being into that stuff. And so I've always been kind of like tuned into reality and like I don't know, just this way that's interested in like what's happening underneath the surface. Like as a Scorpio rising, I'm always kind of like trying to tune into that like emotional underbelly of life. And sometimes it's messy, sometimes it's really transformative and healing. And then I found astrology in 2017. And yeah, it was just this interesting way of like, I've always loved language. Like I'm pretty good at foreign languages and like picking up like a vocabulary for something, and like all of that kind of gives you at the level of your perception, like language and how it like shapes your kind of understanding of like what's actually happening in front of you. And that's what astrology was for me. It was like this kind of other language, but not just like, oh, I can talk to somebody about it, but literally like, no, I'm seeing the world differently because of this. And so that's what learning astrology was for me in terms, like if we're thinking about like embodiment, like Cameron and like the at-bats, I started to kind of see every encounter with somebody, or every time I got to look at a chart as kind of an at-bat too. And it just, the correspondences that come through with that, it's fascinating for one. And then eventually, you get that kind of understanding and that number of at-bats, and then you want to do something about it. And so that's how I got into electional astrology, which is picking times to kind of take action and bring about certain outcomes. And so I've been practicing electional astrology for a couple years, and that's kind of what I focus on with my astrology practice. I also do talking to people about their charts and bringing in a look at somebody's like timing, like how somebody's chart is not just like a thing, but also how it's like moving and changing through time. And kind of bringing in electional astrology with that perspective as well. So kind of bridging the prediction with the agentive, and like making something of your chart.
Beautiful.
I knew you use at least one word that I don't know what it means, what you did, but
Oh no, wait, what was
at
it?
the very end, what did you say? The difference between did you say agentive?
Yeah, just like agency,
Agency.
Yeah.
And that's what I was going to ask about when I was listening to you, because I have this, I mean, it's like a life question, but definitely with astrology, right? Like, since I've done my own natal chart, and like you all did my son's natal chart, and just looked at other natal charts, I'm like, this shit is predestined. Like, I might as well just chill, or like this new moon that's happening in my chart right now around relationships. It's like, yeah, I've struggled with this for 40 years, and the new moon wasn't going to come until 2021. So like, so then when I heard you talk about like electoral, is that what you call it? Astrology?
Yeah.
Electional.
I felt like that resistance, like it's just, you know what I mean? Like, it's all predestined. I don't have control over it.
Yeah. I mean, there's like it's a funny thing, like fate and free will, that's this whole thing in astrology. And I think that, what do I think about that? I mean, I think that choices are definitely constrained. Like there are constraints, like practical things in the world. Like you can't just kind of zoom up into the level of like absolute possibility. And there's not this, there's no kind of magic bullet to make things like according to like, there's reality. You have to like always obey sort of like the rules of the universe. But I think that, we have to act. We have to act like we have that kind of agency, even if it's impossible to be fully like independent and autonomous and like make things the way you want them. We kind of have to act like you can. Otherwise, it just gets really, kind of grim. And I think that there's this funny thing that like, at least for me with astrology, you have to do where you have to be able to kind of contemplate and move through ambiguity. Like you have to be able to hold like polarities and like both things at the same time. Like you need to be able to hold that kind of predestination and like this idea of like purpose and like what I'm here for and like archetypes and like all of these ways that my life, all these forms that my life can take and that they will take, at the same time as like having some kind of, ability to negotiate that in some way. And so rather than just like kind of signing off on, predestination with astrology, I think that astrology actually gives us the tools to at least be contemplative with that kind of predestination and like understand it in a deeper way, and using astrology to kind of like engage with that predestination in a way that, brings fulfillment and not necessarily control, but like a kind of intimacy, I suppose.
Yeah, I think of it like, well, I hear you kind of pointing to the paradox, I guess, but I also think about it like the weather, like, like I have a sense of what the weather's going to do. So I plan how I dress or what days I'm going to go to the store. But also on the chart, I feel like there's like certain destination points that I'm never going to get around. Like that destination is going to arrive, and maybe I get choice in the path from A to B or how, but not the destination.
No, like fate point.
Oh,
yeah. What do you think about it?
I call those fate points. It's like there could be like 20 different ways I'm going, and I have free will how I get to those fate points. Right. So it's like, to me, the truth of paradox is like when we like feel into it, for me, in my experience, is that it just becomes like they actually are consorts. Like they belong together. They're married, free will and fate, you know? So yeah, I have, even just thinking about, no matter what happens, if I am fated, then I'm like, okay, I can still choose to do something. I still have free will within that fate. Right. So it's like, they're never separate for me anymore. So I think that's a good thing to tune into, because when we lean into that, then we actually start making choices that we might not have made before, you know, and enacting, you know, and who's to say that fate is just like solid and concrete anyway? I think there could be different types of fate as well. Like the kind that, so like one could be like a fate point, and then one is like, well, I was fated to become an astrologer because I worked hard. That was my fate. And I used my free will to get to that fate, you know? So I always just think of it as like a dynamic interplay of the two. So, yeah. And also I've seen it happen. And even with the weather, if you make different choices, maybe in certain places on the planet, there wouldn't be acid rain, and it'd be clean rain that we could just put a bottle out and just drink it and just, you know? So it's like, even though the weather is going to way, like, kind of rain is it that's coming down? Were you going to say, Drew?
Well, just this idea of like fate points, and that like there are many kind of, you know, you have like kind of one after the other, and that instead of like seeing fate as this kind of one line that you have, like, you know, this happens and this happens and then this happens. What if you could kind of pull that line around into a circle and see that all of the fate points that you arrive at are actually like the same thing, like they all emerge from the same kind of archetypal shape. And if we can see that shape through the birth chart, then, you know, I'm really into this idea that you can, that being able to connect those dots across your life is like not just fun, but also really fulfilling.
Can you give an example just to ground us?
Yeah, totally. So like for me, for example, I have a bunch of stuff in my 6th house, which is about employment and work. And I've had a lot of different experiences around employment and work. Like I've had different jobs. My 6th house is Aries. So, you know, I'm self-employed, I'm independent in that way, but I haven't been self-employed my whole life. I had a job, I was selling cars for a little bit, but within that experience of selling cars, I was like really like independent and kind of like really pushy with my bosses actually, and like trying to like improve conditions and like make things better for the people around me. And that kind of, I feel like there's this kind of echo that happens where like I kind of, I don't know, I'm like kind of pushing boundaries no matter what in with my work situations. So that's just like a personal example. I'm trying to think of other things. Cameron, do you have any ideas about that kind of idea of like,
the circle?
Like the archetype?
How does that though? Even your example, like the circle you talk about, like
I can say more around that.
Okay.
Yeah. So there's a timing technique in which every 12 years you come back around to the same area of life, right? So right now where I'm at, I'm in 4 classes right now, right? And the last time I was at this type of year that I'm in right now, I was graduating from college, and I got like, what was it, like the Outstanding Psychology Student of the Year award, right? So that was a while ago. And right now what I'm doing, it's not that I'm like have gotten like some award specifically from like an institution, but just like in my practice of astrology, it's like I'm being rewarded in a lot of different ways and being like recognized and really acknowledged in a big way. And it's like, and I'm in school, like I'm learning like the next level, right? So it's like I'm getting my master's in astrology and in yoga right now, type of thing, right? So it's like I'm getting rewarded for that, because I mean I write for Yoga Journal, and I like got like a lot of awards for that pretty much this year. And then also just like in astrology. I'm just recognized. So it's like that is
That
it's
upward
like,
spiral.
back to the same thing, right? It's it's spiralic, right? It's
but
like
it's
sometimes
moving up.
in this case, yeah, but I totally think that, you know, it could move up or down. It's just like remembering that it's spiralic feels like what's the most important thing to me, because if I know that I could go up or down, then if I feel like I'm going down, then I can tune into that in a way that allows me to have ease and comfort, and then can just go up again.
Well, an agency. That's what I was thinking about, is like the free will is one, the free will of what awareness you get as you go through the spiral. And the free will is like becoming aware of your ability to experience different dimensions within the spiral, and like identify the dimension you're in and see how many dimensions like you can like ascend around a pattern that you keep coming back to.
Well, I think about it. I mean, I think about it like in a friendliness kind of way. The way I'm interpreting astrology, and I'm pretty young in working with it and experiencing it, like noticing what happens for me when I'm aware of my astrology and transits. But it's like, it's kind of like all the practices we have learned. It's like there's these practices, and if we're really in devotion with some of our consciousness practices, like there's some places where we get a more ease and agency. Like the more we wake up to, the more ease we can have about certain stuff that's going on. And I feel like with astrology, there's a patterning, you know, so like we happen to know some of our patterns around what kind of, like the stuff that's challenging for us in this life, the things we came here to learn about. Like we kind of know what some of those are. I feel like astrology is another articulation of some of those things. And I do think about it in a spiral way, but I think about healing that way too, because I feel like the more that we tune into, the more that we learn, it's like we're unraveling, we're like unwinding, and we see the same things, like the same issues will come up. Like stuff about my dad comes up, but I'm seeing it from this new place after all this awareness and experience, and I've integrated all of that, and you see all this stuff from new places. So for me, the two things are like, the more that I feel like I know and understand about my experience and what is happening and how to see reality clearly, astrology for me is a part of that. And I get to integrate all that information, and then I get to see it from all these different perspectives and try all the stuff on and see how it feels. And particularly when there's something going on that, because sometimes life feels a little out of control, right? And you feel a little bit victimized by it. But it's like I've been going through this 7-year Uranus transit of my 7th house. And I didn't know any of that, but Drew, literally the first day I met him, was like, did anything happen April 2019? I'm like, yes. That was like the day I met like someone that I was in relationship with for a couple of years that completely upended what I knew about primary relationship. And so there's something that's really friendly to me, not to be like, oh, this is just happening because it's my moon's in Taurus and I'm having a Uranus transit, and, you know, Uranus is in Taurus and the blah, blah, blah. It's like, there's something here for me to learn about for a minute. And I get to know that he's like, yeah, the first 2 years are the roughest. And I'm like, cool, I'm not fucking crazy. Like I've been on this thing for 2 years feeling completely undone. And like the fact that it might've been faded to some extent is friendly to me. Because one, it's not gonna last forever. And two, I get to just experience it with that piece of information and choose how I want to relate to it based on that. So I think about how can I use my understanding of astrology and transits to have a friendly experience of whatever's showing up. And as I learn more and more over time, and more gets integrated, that maybe there'll be more ease as well, I guess.
Yeah. I've even had just like really practical level things happen to where it was like, I knew the moon was about to be like conjunct Saturn, and somebody was being like annoying or like upset at the store, right? And like I had more free will space to just be like, oh yeah, moon Saturn, old grumpy person, instead of being like, fuck you, got my face. You know, it's like literally it could be that simple, or it could be as big as like, let me not start this today, let me start this tomorrow. Or I have this program in my head, right? We're conditioned to be like work. And in my chart it says sleep, right? And so I can choicefully go into that in a graceful manner. And also even in that, like sometimes when I used to write about it, I would be like, my fate is to create more free will. That is my fate, you know? So in that way, that's what I invite people to like tune into. And it's a relationship, so it's always changing too, you know?
Yeah, and I think that awareness and like that kind of freedom that comes from that awareness of like the moon being conjunct Saturn and like not getting kind of overly emotionally involved in this kind of, you know, somebody being grumpy. I think it's really powerful to be able to like withhold identifying with something, like just keep your own sort of identification like outside of a situation for just like a split second longer, and like that moment of observation where you can kind of like have that that decision of how to react, or maybe you're just like observing it and you're not even reacting. I think that space is really powerful.
That really resonates with me. Like, and I'm definitely the least. Basically, my life changed when I understood the houses and I understood the importance of my rising sign. Like everything shifted for me and I felt so much agency. And it simplified, you know, like, I don't know, maybe I will. I don't know if I'll ever really take the time to learn the transits and all the planets and where they are, but just knowing, you know, how the houses align with what's happening in the planets. Like that has been my experience is wow, like less identified with what's happening, less feeling like I did something wrong to create whatever's happening, and also more of like holding change and embracing change and recognizing how much, you know, how often like I can have this 2-week period that's amazing and like a planet's going to move and, you know, now I'm going to have to adjust. And I can see the way that I used to kind of make that very personal, like I'm doing life right or I'm not. So yeah, that really resonates around like less identification and more ease and flow and with the process of nature, you know?
Yeah, and then it gets kind of interesting when you bring in like looking ahead to that. Like it's one thing to kind of, you know, look at the energy of the moment, but then when you are looking at what's to come, it's really playful. Like I'd like to think about like prophecy as like a kind of play. And, you know, you get to try on different ideas about what the future is through symbols that are very like astrological symbols that are, you know, concrete in a way, but also very flexible. And you can imagine sort of like different versions of, you know, if you have like a Mars transit, you could imagine like different versions of a Mars transit that you have coming up, or different versions of a Venus transit. Like maybe your Venus transit is meeting somebody who you fall in love with, or maybe your Venus transit is, you know, getting a gift from your lady neighbor of some really nice skin products, which has happened to somebody, one of my friends who had like a 7th house Venus transit, and he just got like all these nice face products from somebody next door. And it's like, seeing how many different ways it can come up. There's something really playful about that kind of anticipation, and it makes, you know, play is fun, and I think life should be fun, and so I think astrology kind of plays in that way too.
Yeah, I love that.
Cameron, you talk about play a lot.
Yeah, I'm even over here just like giggling already. I'm like, yeah, I love that so much. Oftentimes don't see people play with astrology in that way. So I think it's really, really important. And to me, sometimes too, the way I like to play with it is like, I just sit and I just like imagine like, what would that be like if I was 12 years old again? Like, what would that transit look like? Or like, what would it look like if I already had a family? Or what would it look like if I was doing what's ideal? And then just like feeling into all those spaces, so that like going back to like the dropping the identification, it's like I just can drop it there and allow it to like birth forth. And also I like to play with meditations. Like that's super fun to me. So I'll just like doing like a lot of meditations around like, you know, and for me too, it's like sometimes people are trying to control stuff. I'm like, since I've practiced astrology, I've had less control, right? But I do ask for guidance more. So I can just like play with the meditation and like allow it to show me like what direction am I moving towards? And then over time, I'm beginning to see like how that's unfolding externally. So now I can like predict things more, right? So, and to me, that's fun to predict things at this point in time, right? Like sometimes there's serious stuff, but for me with my Gemini moon, I'm like, ooh, like I wonder what that's going to be, you know? Like I'm like, okay, cool. Like I have all these tools and toys to play with. Now, like, what can I like not only tell somebody like, hey, this looks pretty concrete, but also like, hey, this is how we play in this playground that is next month, right?
Exactly.
It's
You have like
that,
when you have a game, like the game has rules, or there's like, you know, things that you have to work within, and that's what makes it fun, right? It's like you have these things that you have to obey, but like, what if you could be better at like playing that game, you know, like that specific kind of game.
Well, that's what I get excited about around all of this is like, I really associate this life with being in a game or a video game, like a field. And I think part of the whole thing is like, you get dropped in, like, let's, you know, Super Mario Brothers or something, you get dropped in, you don't know any of the rules, and you just learn the rules by running into stuff. And so then astrology to me is like the map. Like, yeah, we dropped you in and we gave you a map. And, you know, once you figure out that you have the map, you have a lot more agency over the game.
Yeah. These are facts.
So. I like that, the metaphor of like the chart as a map. I'm trying to think of like what other kind of, you know, metaphors are so like important for like just understanding something, and like the map is one that's
all
out
the
there.
astrologers are obsessed with metaphors. Like,
yeah.
it's the most mercurial bunch ever. Okay, I got introduced to astrology late in the game, and I was like, oh, this is gonna be like really spiritual, mystical, magic stuff. I'm gonna learn some magic stuff. And then I started like really following a lot of people on Twitter and like listening to podcasts. And I was like, and I say this with love, I honor and love nerds, like, so it's like hardcore nerds, like so many words, so many like ways to weave things together, and it's so data based. I mean, it's true, it's like a science more than an art. I mean, there's tons of artfulness in it, but I didn't actually know, for listeners that aren't aware, that it's like pattern mapping, and it's super data heavy, and it's like really relies on history to such a high extent, to looking for like what kind of patterns are happening. And so I didn't know any of that. And so it's just really nerdy, and I'm kind of mercurial and I love it. So I love like basically hearing people nerd out on astrology and how it works and how they see it and how they experience it. And then I hear like a lot of artfulness in how it's communicated about. So I think it's like one of the most artfully communicated about sciences. That's kind of how I think about it now. I don't know if that resonates or not, but.
Yeah, with astrology being like mercurial for sure. Like that, it's funny you said weaving, because there's a traditional source from like his name's Vedius Valens. He was like a Roman astrologer or I guess I think he lived in Alexandria, like back when that was a thing. And he said that astrology is mercurial, and also so is weaving. And so it's just funny that he's like that idea of like bringing threads together and like mixing things. And it's interesting, he also said that that Mercury rules, there's different translations of what he said, but false reasoning, or like kind of like this trickster idea of Mercury, like making you see things one way, and then all of the kind of like ripple effects of that. Like, well, what if I just continued with that idea of how things are, and I played with that for a while, and then there's this moment in every kind of trickster story where like the trick gets revealed, and then you go back and you're like, okay, what if it's this way? And then you do that for a while, and then the trick gets revealed, and then you keep kind of going through this this kind of adopting of a certain idea of yourself, or a certain idea of the world, or the way that things work. And it's not possible to ever conclude that cycle. Like there is no like end point, but it is kind of necessary to act as if there is an end point. in order to ever understand anything at any level, if that makes sense.
That's how I think about healing.
Yeah.
And that's how I think about what we offer on this podcast, of just all these different tools. Like I learned the conscious leadership model, and I went really, really far with that. And then there was some stuff that was just stuck, that wasn't with those practices quite moving or changing or solving for me. And then I got really into somatic experiencing and more body-based practices, and like all this other stuff got unlocked. And I was like, oh, I see. And then astrology. And it's like, you just keep layering on new stuff, and you keep learning new aspects, and healing's never done. And, you know, we always are holding this question if healing's even needed, if it presupposes that something is broken, that it would need to heal. But for me, I just love it. I love everything, how differently I experience things, and how much agency I feel like I have, how much surrender I have access to, from learning all these things and kind of getting into all this stuff. And I don't know if it's trickster energy, but it's like, yeah, there's always cool new stuff that I'm paying attention to. And that's one of the beautiful things I think about the art of healing. If you choose to look at it, is like, you get to pick your plans, like a choose your own adventure novel, and you just get to try different stuff and see where it leads you, and see what happens, and I call it data points, but just trying different stuff and getting data points and seeing if you like the results. And if you don't, you can go try something else.
I had an acid trip one time where I like met Mercury, or
like this direction.
I know you guys are. I know you guys are. I was visiting my. It was during the pandemic, and my friend who was like living in Iowa on there's like post Bernie Sanders had dropped out, but she was like working on his campaign, and so she was like still in Iowa, and I was like, oh, okay, I guess I'll go to Iowa and visit you. There's nothing going on here. So anyway, we took acid one day, and I don't remember what the moon was doing, but it must have been like in some kind of Mercury situation. But yeah, it was just like having this experience of like being led to the edge of possible understanding, and like being in one kind of mode of understanding things. And like here's how you have to like think about things in order for everything to make sense, and just being kind of led. And then at the very end, there was just this smirk, or this kind of like, haha, like that kind of trick. And then we started watching America's Next Top Model, and I was like having this kind of thing with like the host, or like, you know, Jay, or, you know, the different kind of like the game show host, and like kind of experiencing that person as like a Mercury figure, like who's gonna win, like is it, I don't know, getting into like the really trippy part of that now, where it was like getting into, I was peaking while we were watching Top Model, so that's definitely part of the memory. But that smirk, I feel like that smirk at the end of, like, you know, there's something like really powerful in that trick, and I think that's why astrology is like so powerful too, is that, you know, it leads us to the possible edge of understanding, and then asks us to kind of reevaluate. Like Mercury is essentially like a destabilizer. And like, even though it does give you this sense of like understanding, and like, here's how everything like practically works, here's how the pieces fit together. At the very end, at the end of the day, Mercury is here to kind of destabilize what you think you know, so that you have to like try something else. So I think that's kind of what we do with astrology.
I think about all the planets like as people, like, or as they're very personified for me. And I think about the relationship with the planets and the earth, and the constellation. And then I think about in my own natal chart, the way that the constellations show up like interdependently, right? Like, I know my house of committed partnerships is like in Virgo, and how like all my committed partnerships are Virgos. Like, there's just like this way that the constellation continues to show up in my reality. And, I like to think that like the planets and the earth are all just this interdependent community that are constantly having in relationship, and those relational, you know, experiences energetically then impact what's happening in our field.
1,000%. Yeah, that's the way I look at it too. And then I look at it on like the various levels of and layers of that. So like even just taking like the organ systems, like they're all their own like people within me as a person, just like they are like in the celestial spheres, you know, or just like they are in plants or ecosystems. Like every ecosystem is going to have a mercurial kind of energy, a Jupiter kind of energy. Like it's always there in all the ways. And like, that's the whole, like everything is everything thing. Like, but like I actually have been able to like tangibly taste it, you know, where it's like this experience happens. And then like this experience happens for this person. They also have had like a liver thing going on, and Jupiter just so happened to go into their sixth house. You know, it's like these things on these different layers and levels. It's just like the more and more we can see that. Even Bethany was saying like how the data points, like I actually have been using all the data points to lead all back to astrology. So that somatic experience, it's an astrology. Like there's going to be a correspondence there, you know, because it's reflecting that mirror, that above and below, and weaving them together because they're not separate. They're really together. And the thing that brings it together is Mercury, and Mercury's the breath, right? And that's like what weaves us back and forth between like spirit and body, right? It's like that in and out. And that's why joy's in the first house, because that's when it comes here. It's the breath. So yeah, Mercury. I just love Mercury, and I've been working with Mercury so much more. And even I did a Mercury talisman recently, and the only thing I could notice it did is worked on my yoga practice, my pranayama practice. That's the only thing I've noticed so far. Like, wait, that's not true. Never mind, that's not true. Other things did happen.
Say something about talisman for people that might not know what that is.
I'm not the greatest at defining talismans. However, Drew, you want to define that?
Yeah, true.
I can, but okay.
I mean, I can give an astrological definition, but it's funny, like my experience of talismans before finding astrology. One time, I'll give the astrological definition, but I just want to start out with this, where my mom was, we were doing a lot of like, I kind of mentioned the like manifestation and just like really esoteric kind of stuff when I was a kid. And I remember one time she came home from a retreat, and they had done this like this discipline where it was like sort of imagining your future, or like going into the future and leaving something in place for your then self to kind of find. And that was like the talisman. It was like this kind of sign of your past self having left something for you in the future. And so what she kind of planted for herself in the future was a teddy bear. And on her way home from the retreat, there was like this car accident in front of her, and she pulled over to like make sure that everybody was okay. And on the ground, like apparently having fallen out of the truck that was in an accident, was a teddy bear. And so she like took that teddy bear home, and it was Future Bear. And so that was a talisman for her. She referred to that as a talisman. And so I think there are ways that like, you know, I guess a talisman is just like a meaningfully imbued object at like the most basic level. Like you could think of any kind of, you know, it holds the charge of a specific time and a specific experience, and it kind of emanates with like ripples of that kind of shape out from it. And so when you engage with that talisman, you're essentially you're being invited into that experience again. And so astrologically, how that works is you kind of you take an object that you want to imbue with meaning, that you want to imbue with that kind of specific sort of experience, and imbue it with a planet, basically, or an assemblage of planets. And so to do that, we use astrological timing, and we use ritual, we use incantation, spells, we call on spirits to kind of come into the object. And the idea behind, like, why do this? Like, why do we need the object? Why can't we just like summon it into, the air around us or something like that? And maybe you can, but with the object, the reason that you need an object for the talisman is endurance. You need it to last. And so you put it in the body of the thing in order to kind of make it last longer. So you take that astrological moment, that alignment of the planets that you really like, and you invite it into the object. You concretize it in the object. And so then that moment, that magical moment, lasts as long as the object does, which in the case of, a lot of magical objects, or like if it's a metal or something that has a lot of kind of staying power in a material sense, that's where the power comes from. And it's going to last as long as the object does.
Do you have one?
I haven't made any, I've made paper talismans before. And I have, there are some astrological magicians who I've gotten talismans from. Yeah, so I do, yeah. And so one of them is a Procyon talisman. Procyon's a fixed star in Cancer. And it's, my moon, it has a connection with Procyon. And so it was funny, one time I was wearing this talisman while I was doing laundry. And I was I was at a laundromat, and the TV's going, and there's this game show where it's like a family game show, and they're like trying to win their fortune, right? So I'm trying to remember what show it was, but it's one of these kind of game shows. And here I was doing laundry, and there's like families on TV like trying to win a fortune, and like these are all kind of lunar ideas. And so I was having this kind of experience with the talisman that way. I don't know, Cameron, do you have other stuff to say about talismans? I've been talking a lot.
No, that was all really artful and that's why I asked you to say it. That was good, because I'll be like, man, I just draw down the moon and bring it to my shit. Like, I don't know, sometimes I just really like ratchet with it. But yeah, so I've actually been making talismanic tinctures for a while, before I was like actually, before I was doing it just like kind of gung-ho intuitively, and they were working. It's just like sometimes they were working to an extent where it was like I was doing like Pluto talismanic tinctures, and like people were looking to detox, and it would happen. But it would like bring up a lot of like emotional content. So I started having to like only sell them to specific people that I was working with deeply. And so that was like kind of me like playing and bumping my head and stuff like that. But I just sent one out like a week and a half ago in a Jupiter talismanic tincture. And the person was taking it for 1 week. And in a week, they got their first audition. And they had no anxiety, which they like generally tend to have anxiety just in their waking life. And after they had the audition, which they said went phenomenal, they won a 6-day trip to Cancun for free. So
it was like travel and luxury with Jupiter.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that one was good. And I have a bunch of other ones. I have a Jupiter one that I tend to work with. Like sometimes I'll just take it with me when I'm going somewhere because I feel it. And then, those are the days where somebody's like, sorry, we made an extra drink. Do you want to have it? And it's like, yeah, I do. Thank you. Like, so it could be like little things like that. But I mean, I've had so many experiences with talismans. It's, one of my friends told me at first when I first started working with them that I had beginner's luck. And I don't know, I kind of questioned if I did, but now at this point, I don't know. I've had so many experiences, but not even just with talismans, with just like metaphysical things. And I think that where we're at right now, certain people in certain time, in this time, like we are like a lot of people are doing more astrological magic, but then like the metaphysics of astrology and the potentiality of that is like sometimes it's like getting lost. And I want to bring that back because the magic can be in anything, anywhere, at any time if you know how to tune into it, Yeah. So I think anything could be a talisman, especially the paper talisman thing. I think that's great. And, even if somebody wants to play with making talismans, it's like, if you're doing a paper one, you can always just like rip that one up. So like, I just think, people should like look into it. It's really, really helpful, especially if you have like a meditation practice.
Yeah,
so-
go ahead.
Well, what everything you're saying sort of like recenters on what this podcast is about a lot of times. So, like, what tools do we have to focus on? What kind of energies? What do we most want? What are we processing through? And I mean, I've had an experience. I would say I've experienced healing around using astrology and things like talisman and remediation. Maybe we can get into a little bit too. But like, what has and I also heard you say, Cameron, like there's these high sides and these low sides. So what would you say your experience around healing has been individually, but then, specifically how astrology plays into that? What do you think about healing? What's your story around it? And would you say you've had an experience of it? What comes to it?
Yeah, so my first teacher, her name was Norma de Jesus, and that has nothing to do with astrology at all. But she first told me, like, she looked me straight in my eyes before I even knew it. And she was like, I want you to know something. If you ever are going to be the healer that you're going to become, you have to know that, like, you're going to be a herder, right? So it's like, first off, I start there. Like, I hurt, so I heal, and I might hurt other people, but I also might heal other people. And knowing that that's like always present, and that like really, really grounded me and gave me like a solid foundation for like looking at astrology from a perspective of like, this symbol is representing a hurt, and this symbol is also representing a heal, or what. It's always that. Like, the symbols are always going to say that. They'll show the whole spectrum and range of possibility. So when I come from that orientation, I can like hold space for anything in between that, like the greatest wound of a Venus with also the greatest healing of a Venus. So I feel like, to begin with, I'm always start with like creating a correct orientation creates right relationship, and right relationship means that I'm going to build something that is healing in and of itself. So that's where I would start. So, yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah. And I have a degree in psychology, so that's helpful as well.
Yeah, I think there's something there about like, the potential for both, right? Like the healing and hurting, like those are always kind of at least the potentials for both of them are always like there at the same time, like in the same moment. And one way that I think about that is just the fact that, there are planets that are inflicting pain, like that's kind of like their job, or they inflict suffering, or there's like kind of more, more uncomfortable experiences in life that those planets are like bringing us all the time. And then there are the healers. There are the planets that are bringing like unification and beauty and peace. And those are always, those energies are always like available at the same time, sometimes in, greater strength for some, for some of those planets at one time than another. And so I guess just that idea that there's always multiple potentials, and like looking at sort of what's happening in the moment with your astrology can, or at least for me, gives me a sense of like what areas of my life are being healed right now based on where the planets are, and what areas of my life are being kind of like destroyed or aggravated, or where are the kind of cracks in my life being exposed, and how to kind of move through that experience with that awareness. And maybe that kind of destruction is like a part of healing, because, if Mars is in one part of my chart for a month, like it is right now, Venus is going to be there right after. And so there's that kind of always cycling through of the destruction and the healing. And there's always, both are always happening at the same time.
It makes me want like coaching about something personal, actually. Is like the more of my awareness of my Pisces rising and being a water, like I'm having the experience, and I guess the story I tell myself is I've always had this experience. I wasn't aware of it. It's like whatever's happening, I just get pulled into it. I feel like I'm riding the waves of the energetic of the astrology all the time. So an example would be like, it's getting to the point where I'm like, okay, I can feel and I know in my chart that money is just not a focus right now. So I'm just going to wait until it is again, because when I try to pull myself like into those aspects, like I am literally feeling, I was thinking this in the car today, it's like almost a gravitational pull. But at the same time, there's a way that I feel kind of at the effect or like victimized by what is the word? Like, yeah, I just feel so pulled, like, and then I judge myself, like, I don't have good boundaries? Should I be able to pull myself out? I don't know if this is making sense, but it's definitely something that's really, I've been struggling with.
Yeah. So the healing, the first thing that comes to mind, since we're talking about healing, is the first way to even heal such an energy. The first thing I think about with Pisces is acceptance. So that would be the healing balm immediately right there. It's like, first it's like, can you accept that is actually just what is occurring in this present moment? Because if you can accept it, then you might not judge it. And if you don't judge it, then maybe you can make a different move because you're not using your energy towards judgment. Right. So it's like, even in that moment, like you have a different kind of flow that you can create through that acceptance, So just like simple things like that, and I always thought of astrology from the lens of like where I came from before it. So I had this totally different like orientation towards life than when I came into astrology. Like people were teaching in certain types of ways, but I knew the world wasn't necessarily inherently like that. Like, because the second house could be like, it could be your money, but it also could just be like, well, what do you value? What feels really precious to you right now? Like, do you feel like you don't know what that is right now? Do you feel like you're not going in that direction? Because that, you're probably can tune into that. So even just thinking about like the flow of astrology and how it doesn't have to be money. It could be other things within your psyche or just other things in general, that can also ease the tension around like feeling like you're being necessarily like thrown around. And in a sense, we actually all are, because we can't control what the planet Earth is doing. We can't control what the sun is doing. We can't control what the tidal waves in the ocean are doing. We can't control gravity. So there's layers that are happening right now that are like beyond just thinking about it like from astrological lens, but it's like we all are victimized in a sense by the forces that are grander than us. And if we can accept that and understand them, then, we can actually heal from the sense of like feeling victimized by them.
Yeah, all of that resonates, but what resonates the most is I guess I kind of want to be mirrored, is like, I'm really like, wow, I am really like flowing with the same energy that is making the sunrise and the tide shift. And I am really a part of that. And maybe before I just, where my awareness was placed or whatever, like whatever I told myself about that experience was different. But now, and sometimes it is victimization, and sometimes it is, am I really that one with all that is, that everything that's happening to me is just one with what's happening with everything? And I think there's some of that I want mirrored back to me, or I can feel the part of me that's like, is that just a Pisces thing? Like.
Well, I think it's probably a Pisces thing, but you also have Jupiter in Scorpio, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Maybe.
So
ask Bethany.
Yeah.
Like,
well, I mean, I know Bethany's chart super well.
Yeah, it's the same except for her rising sign and her moon. Everything.
Right. Yeah. So I mean, so yes, that oneness, like that is the nature of Pisces, but then like that Pisces-ness is going to be flavored with like a Scorpio kind of approach, because Jupiter is the ruler of Pisces and is in Scorpio in your chart. And so that combination of that oneness that Jupiter brings, but also with this kind of like intensity and like deep analysis and like questioning, getting to the bottom of something with the Scorpio part. And Scorpio is ruled by Mars, which you also have in Scorpio. So there's this like real Jupiter-Mars combination, which is like, I mean, Mars is like separation and, taking things apart, getting like the components like put together in this way. So there's this like this kind of deep need to understand within that kind of universal connection, like how am I different, or how do I like stand out from this? Because that's what Mars does, is it like decides that kind of, that it's that separating force. And so I think I hear that in sort of the experience that you're describing, with like being one with, but also kind of, I don't know if this is the right language, but like resenting, like being totally one with, or like not being able to step outside of it.
Well, I think what resonates the most is when you said like pull it apart, and just
Yeah.
the extent to which I'm seeing and experience it sometimes feels so granular and almost like overwhelming to have that level of awareness of all the pieces. And then I'm wanting like a mirror, like, am I really seeing this? Is this what I'm seeing? You know, are you seeing that? There's that kind of a feeling to it.
Yeah, like
yeah.
are others seeing reality the same way that you are? Yeah.
Yeah, that's yeah. So I was thinking like the word intimacy came up for me, because it's like if you feel a connection with the all, like I've worked with some people where like I'm like, well, like do you feel like you've had the ability to actually be like, to go all the way there with it and be like intimate? So where it's like the sun is rising, you are rising. The sun is at its highest, we're active. The sun's going down, you're calming down. Like it's like, have you ever like got to engage in that relational dynamic of like really just being intimate with the all that you are experiencing? Because if not, then that can like bring up a lot of tensions in at certain times. So that's something that I would invite you to like feel into and explore, because it will mirror you.
Well, yeah, I feel like I'm dating.
You're what?
Like I'm online dating the all. Like I haven't gone that far, but I feel called from your invitation. I feel called to that resonates with me. And I can feel the part of it that would marry me. Like I understand what you're pointing to at an energetic, and have had a couple of those experiences. And it's so interesting. The mirror of just my own path around intimacy in general is around worthiness, right? And so your kind of point to like acceptance, and like accepting that oneness, and accepting that it can be whatever it is at the right now moment, right, is so parallel to just intimacy, my relationship to intimacy in general.
Totally. Yeah. And it's usually that's like always the first step. And then like there's other steps after that. And it's really interesting when people go down that pathway, because it ends up being like, actually, I don't like one will feel more like autonomy and less like this is happening. And it's just like, you just is experiencing it. It's like, oh yeah, it's happening. And I got to go to this baseball game, or like, and also I got to go eat some food real quick. And that's okay because I accept it first. It's like sometimes we just skip steps in this reality. And there's this thing that people say about Pisces that they're like, it's, and some people don't like it, but it's like, it's all of the signs put together, right? It's like all and nothing. And it's like, people don't like it all the time, but it's actually true in some type of way, So that's a big thing, right? So that's another thing to accept. Is like, sometimes overwhelm will come. And I say it specifically like that because if I say I'm overwhelmed, then that means I'm trying to identify with the collective unconscious, or like this overwhelming force that's coming through, when actually it's just like overwhelming things will happen. And I don't have to say that I am overwhelmed. I am experiencing, but it's like, I don't have to like take it on. Yeah. Exactly. Because that's a lot,
Well, here's my next question. Does the collective have a natal chart?
If they do, I don't know it. That's what I would say.
Well, which collective, like,
right.
I guess, see, you could, like a nation has a birth chart. A state has a birth chart. A city has a birth chart. So there are like different kind of scales of collectivity that we could look at, and we could maybe find charts for those. But in terms of like humanity or something like that. I don't think so. But I think it can be
You don't
useful
have
to
a
kind of
birth
look
time
at
on
those
humanity.
other scales.
Well, what about like the age?
What?
What about like the age of Aquarius or
I was just
something
saying,
like
you don't
like?
have a confirmed birth time on humanity yet.
I'm still trying to find the year for that one. But in terms of like the age of Aquarius,
Like, do
what
we
do you
have,
mean?
like, are we, I hear a lot about the age of Aquarius and we're going through this bridging time and we can look at all the things that the collective patterning or the collective, what we might interpret as collective healing that's happening around separation to interbeingness or things like that. And like, is that part of a wider like astrological scope that's happened over the course of the evolution of the earth? And could age of Aquarius just be one part of that journey?
Yeah, like a different kind of
because I think I hear a lot of like tension around it. So maybe some technical definitions of like what we mean when we say that. Like I've heard,
yeah,
oh, we're in the age of Aquarius now, and then I also have heard of like these 200-year periods of time that we just
right. So those are kind of different things. Yeah. But they often get kind of put in the same category. So, and I'm gonna have to ask everybody to take what I'm about to say with like a slight grain of salt, because I'm like, I don't think about the age of Aquarius that much, to be honest. But what I think it refers to, there's like two things that people usually are referring to today when they talk about it. The first one is based on the recent conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn in Aquarius. And that kind of, so Jupiter and Saturn conjoin every 20 years. This last one that happened at the very end of 2020 happened in Aquarius. And so a lot of people were thinking about like, because Jupiter and Saturn are like the two slowest visible planets. They have this kind of historical feel to them. They move pretty slowly. They come together like every 20 years. There's like this kind of skeletal history that you can maybe like describe using these conjunctions. And in Aquarius, people are maybe just asking like, what's important about the fact that they conjoined in Aquarius this time? I mean, they've conjoined in Aquarius before, like in 1960. Oh no, that's not true. They haven't conjoined in Aquarius in a really long time. Okay, so that's the first definition. But the second one, which is the more kind of long-standing one, is based on, oh my God, this gets so technical. But basically, like when astrology first was devised as a system, the vernal equinox, which is 0 degrees of Aries, like when the sun, like March 21st, right? When the sun is at 0 degrees of Aries, that point was in the constellation of Aries, right? But there's this thing that happens where the equinox actually, like, even though the equinox in terms of like the equal light, equal night, that day on the year when you have equal light and equal night, even though that happens on like the same day every year that point in terms of the stars, in terms of the constellation, moves slightly. And so the age of Aquarius is the point at which that point has moved into Aquarius, the constellation. I think that's correct. I don't know if Cameron can like cross-reference me or something.
Yeah. That's it.
Okay.
Oftentimes when people talk about the age of Aquarius, the first thing I really say to people is like, where does red stop and where does orange begin in a rainbow? Like, and also it's like we were in a certain type of age, and we can see that technology starting to like, not starting to, it's here, right? So we're in like, are we in that or are we transitioning to that? And what are we going to do about that? Like, that's what I'm way more interested in. But I tend to take that approach and stance when people are like debating stuff. I'm like, okay, cool. Y'all can sit and talk about it. And I'm going to like tune in and like help the process that is occurring. That's my orientation to it a lot of times, especially when it comes to talking to like a broader audience, like to think about that as along with everything else or in spite of everything else. That's what I would offer.
And Aquarius is about technology and like kind of social paradigms and bettering social things. Those are some of the main things people point to?
It could be about bettering. It could also be about fragmentation. Like, in the astrology that I learned, on one side of the spectrum, it's like how we fragment from ourselves and get away from what's true. And also it's how we find our unique authenticity that is away from the social norms and like what people tell us we should do. So I just always invite people to tune into the spectrum of it rather than like bettering, because I don't know if things are getting better or worse. Cause it's like, we might be getting better, but also it's like based off of what I don't see nature feeling better. So
Right.
I don't know.
Right. I mean, it's one thing I love about the way that that you talk about this is because it's like, we have the idea of Aquarius, but then you also have to like look at what's actually happening, I guess. Yeah. And so like, yeah, I just really appreciate that.
The reason I brought it up is like going back to that, Cameron, I can't remember how you said it, but I was thinking fractal, how everything is just, you were talking about the organs are a fractal of everything else. So it's like, if I have a natal chart and I'm in this community, right, of like billions of other people, like, how are we just all a fractal of each other? And our astrology is a part of that. So one of the questions that we ask on the podcast is, what do you believe about collective healing? And so I guess my question is more like, what do you believe about collective astrology and its role?
Cool. I can say a decent amount around this. So the first thing I'd look to when I think of collective things is the outer planets, because they're the forces that are like beyond and also in the body, right? Just making it really practical. The way I look at the outer planets, so Pluto, Neptune, Uranus, I think of them as like, I'm not 1,000% certain on Pluto, but the way I work with it currently is it based off of it being the endocrine system, right? That's collective in the body. Uranus would be the electromagnetic energy that a human holds within their being. That's collective in a human, right? And then Neptune would be the lymphatic system. That's collective. It's everywhere. So no matter what's going on, right? You could think about Venus and Mercury and blah, 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 blah. It's like, but if the lymphatic system's off, or if the nervous system's off, or if the endocrine system's off, it's going to affect everything collectively. So just thinking of it from like that lens, it's like, how can I tap into those things in everybody, in anything? That's where I really started because I do like working with health so much. So taking a step back and saying that I worked with evolutionary astrology primarily when I first started, not when I first started, but like when I first started doing readings. And that has to do with like the biggest empowerment or disempowerment that's going on. And right now, Pluto is in Capricorn, and Capricorn represents structures in the system. So like just taking that in of itself, it's like we're going through a transmutation process, a dying process of the old systems and the ways of being, in the way that people think that they're authority figures, that's dying off, and something else new needs to come that's more empowering. Ideally, it could restructure itself into something that's more disempowering as well. So I would invite people to just make sure that they tune in and really feel into that. So that's Pluto. And I'll stop at Pluto for now. And we can go to other ones if y'all desire. But Drew, what do you feel?
Yeah, I mean, I'm really interested in like using astrology as a tool to analyze history and like understand sort of like collective movements, like cultural trends, or just the ways that society changes through history. And so I've looked at that with Pluto transits for the last, I guess, like since I was born. So I'm like really interested in this kind of mid 90s to the present moment of astrology in terms of the transit of Pluto. And Pluto's only been in 2 different signs since that time. So it was in Sagittarius. And like Cameron said, now it's in Capricorn. And I guess I'm not sure how much that kind of awareness, like personally for me, like how much that awareness is like very clearly tied to healing. Like just because I can, look at and analyze that kind of those trends based on the transit of Pluto. I don't know if that shows me what's being healed, or if that tells me like what has been healed or what's possible to heal. I think Pluto's really interesting because it does like break down and decompose, and it kind of sets the ground for new things to emerge. And I really like, I just want to say, I really like what Cameron said about like, you know, being aware of like, it could be worse, right? Like, I think it's really easy to when we look at cycles, historically and collectively, it's really easy to get in this kind of pattern of, you know, things get better, because that's kind of how, especially in the West, we've been trained to think about the world. And I'm afraid that sometimes that can distract us from the ways that things are not getting better, and kind of be, you know, it can kind of numb us to, or paralyze us against making progress. And so anytime that something comes up astrologically and people are talking about, you know, how awesome something is in the future, or like the you know, the near present and like going into the future, I'm always like, yeah, I appreciate that imagination, like that desire to kind of envision. And I think that imagination is really powerful as a social force, and we need that. And also astrology can be a little like, there's moments where I feel like that's kind of zooming out too much. And so I really like the kind of the presence, thinking about these things in terms of like presence and like, you know, at bats and like these kind of moment to moment practices. And I'm not sure, I'm not sure about like, you know, like personal healing's never over. And I don't think that we're ever going to be in a period of history where like there's no evil or there's no kind of pain, you know. I think that stuff is part of life. And I don't think there's, yeah, I hope that doesn't sound
But do you think that it's an upward spiral of more awareness, or do you think, you know what I mean? Like, is it like the fractal that we talked about before? And then do we have free will? Like, I guess when I'm listening to both of you, I'm super interested, and it doesn't align with some of the things that I heard you both say about the process of individual healing around astrology.
Yeah, well, if you talk about the collective, then you have a certain amount of control, and also the context that we use oftentimes is very human centric. So if Cameron's talking about the collective, then I'm talking about Earth first, probably. So if Earth is healing right now, and that looks like a bunch of tornadoes and earthquakes and stuff, it's really harmful to humans. And we might be like, oh no, it's happening. Oh no, the end of the world. And Earth might just be like, oh man, shit, you're just shaking it off. Like, I need to get rid of this bacteria. You know, like, not saying that's happening, but it's just like, I just think about these things. So I offer perspectives that I've seen, you know, because yeah, it's like, what collective are we talking about? It's like, from a human perspective, it's up in the air for me from a human perspective. I have more like faith in just like nature and the natural being of Earth that it is in and of itself. So that feels good to me. Like, when I think of Earth and feeling to the energy of Earth, it feels like it's going through a purging process and it's restructuring what's going on here. But I don't know what that's going to do to humans. Oh, I might have cut out.
Well, that's what I'm saying. I guess like that resonates with me. And it's, I guess for me, kind of going back to what we were saying earlier, like, I'm at a certain level of awareness, humans and Earth, we're all one thing, and it's all happening to all of us. But our perspective on what's happening, right, is like, has to do with where we are in time and space and where we are in our own journey. But could it be possible that we're all healing together, that we're all in the upswing together with Earth, definitely, and we're in the low swing with Earth at the same time, you know?
Well,
yeah, Catherine.
My sense, so outside of astrology as a framework, so we both like practice and coach conscious leadership model, and so it's a binary model where we're locating ourselves of if we're reactive, and in resistance to what's happening, or are we in presence and are we allowing and accepting what's happening, and just using that as like a lens to notice what we're doing and choose how we want to be with that. And one of the things I'm the most, we would say below the line, one of the things I'm the most triggered about, or historically have been, because I do environmental activism work in my day job, and I really don't experience myself as consistently present and in an allowing state around what's happening. So I'm doing a lot of stuff all the time, and some of it is from reactivity. And one of my teachers in this model was like, Bethany, you have like a lot of stories about what's good and bad about the earth, and kind of what you just touched into, Cameron. So she's like, are you available to experience humans dying off as a species as love? Are you available to experience, to let your heart break about the last white rhino dying and experience that as love? And with astrology, with all of these other tools, I feel like the collective is getting access to new maps, new frameworks, and new ways to deconstruct even like their ideas of reality. That's what I see like a really consistent, like we have so much more information, perspective, like, and that's very Aquarian, I suppose, like the amount of information that we have access to, that we could collectively really be transcending whatever our stories and beliefs are around even healing, or what's good and bad, or right and wrong, and just how much can we be with our experience ourselves and the collectives, like how much resistance do we have in any given moment, or how much surrender, how surrendered can we be, and not in a lack of agency way, like, but so I when Lauren talks, I feel that we are leveling up, and not everyone's choosing to get on board with that, not everybody cares to think about it, and that's fine too, but I think the opportunity for us to see reality more clearly and deconstruct all of our beliefs and all of our levels of reactivity, and just be in our experience more, and in that way have a little more agency. It does feel like there's some kind of opportunity. It feels like there's some kind of edge that we're like leaning into as a society collectively. And everyone has all their different ideas about what's good and bad about that and what should happen.
Yeah.
There's always going to be all of that individual ego involved, and everyone's just going to spin themselves out about that all the time. But it does seem that there's a lot of availability and access to really new ways of thinking, which does remind me of some of those outer planet things, like transformation and even Uranian energy, like, okay, this is happening now. Okay, this is happening now. How willing are you to be with whatever's happening, whatever thing that you didn't think was going to happen next, and how easeful can you be with that? Things like that. So.
Yeah. I feel that. Yeah.
I mean, I feel like being available for, like, one of the things with astrology, like, I think in order to do astrology in a way that's like healthy and, promoting healing, you have to be willing for things to be bad. Otherwise, it's just another way to kind of reconcile things like continuing to be bad, I guess. Or like, I feel like, sorry. Yeah, I feel like, it's if somebody has a really like difficult transit coming up, and I'm just going to get back to the personal for a second to make it a little bit, just to be, for clarity's sake, like if somebody has a really difficult transit coming up, like Saturn's on their moon and Mars is on their sun, and they're having eclipses happen on their ascendant, I don't know, like some wild combination of stuff, wouldn't it be kind of damaging for me to tell that person, it's a period of elevating your consciousness, or like like, what if it's just bad? I feel like being available for pain is part of healing itself, and being available for extinction. I mean, that's something that we really have to be concretely Like we have to stay with these kind of material conditions in the world. And personally, I think that consciousness, like I don't think that I think consciousness is a word that's like it's very easy to be kind of like more or less consciousless. Like, am I more or less aware? And I like to kind of, remind myself that it might not be about that. It's like, what kind of consciousness, what kind of awareness? Like, how can I use astrology to partner with my awareness to produce a certain kind of noticing or attention? And what's the goal? The goal of that attention, I think, ought to be like a realism, like what's actually happening. And the symbols, like the divine kind of archetypes and symbols, being partners in that awareness to bring about like a realism that is also like a spiritually aligned realism, something that feels like it's more than just like stuff happening. But I think that, like, Lauren, to your point about like the upward spiral, I think that we can strive to, I don't think that we should strive to see things as an upward spiral, but I think that we can try to ride the spiral in a way that is like realistic about what direction it's going. And maybe in that kind of realism, we can be available for change that we want to make. And like, there's the agency that comes in, right? So yeah, that's what I think about this in the moment.
Yeah, I appreciate what you're saying. It's actually like a lot is happening over here, but I guess the best, there's even something in what you're saying, like a little attunement is just even that pain is bad, I guess, like I would say, and I'm not trying to be like make myself special in this, because I know most of the world has had this experience, but I like this last year kicked my ass, like uprooted my whole life, like, and my dad died and I lost students, and like my home is upended, my finances, like every single thing. And it's like, I can see it's like pulling weeds, creating fresh soil. And it was painful and I hated it. And if you were my astrologer, I mean, I even remember when you told me some of the stuff that was coming up when we met that one time. And I was like, fuck. And that was like a month of like 12 months of shit that has occurred,
Yeah.
But the further I get in my own life, the more I'm like, every single time my life has been completely uprooted, it's been redirected in a way that's more of service. Like I can't ever not see that. So, and it doesn't make me invite the pain anymore or be excited about those things that are happening. But it does leave me with a sense of like, I can be with pain and be realistic about pain. And in my reality, like life is for me every single time, I guess, is also what I feel.
Yeah, that's good to keep in mind. And I also think of it in a way of like, everybody's in different spaces and play with what is and what isn't true. And I also think like of pain sometimes, like if I know a young person, like a child, and they have pain, they're just gonna be like, oh, I'm hurt, and they're gonna cry, right? Because that's just what they experience. That's what they know. If I experience pain, I might be like, oh, I'm in that one stage of pain in which is like really the healing part, or I'm like, oh, I'm in pain. Oh yeah, I got yarrow, I got ice, I got a hot tub, right? Mm-hmm. So it's like those are two different orientations to pain. Both of them are pain. So one can actually be fine and okay, and then the other one might not be fine and okay. I know that they're fine and okay. Other people might not find and okay. So it's like we have to be really. I feel like we have to be really embedded in our presence and in our awareness of what's happening. Because if I just said like pain is just pain and like blah blah, and I just kind of glide over it, other people might feel like, oh, they're bypassing blah blah, and I'm like, actually, you didn't ask me why I said it that way, because I have the antidote for what you say this pain is. Like, I know the antidote, so I'm chilling. But somebody else might be like, I don't know the antidote, I'm freaking out, you know? So it's like, we have to just be mindful of like all those things and like simultaneously. And when we could do that, then it's like, then I can just be like, well, it's like this, and it's like this, and it's like that. And then I'm like, which one are you going to choose? You know, instead of being like, it's all healing, somebody might not digest that. But if I'm like, this, that, here, your chess move. How do you want to live in your life? You have the space, and now you have this new awareness around like what you can choose moving forward. So that's the way that I orient towards it. And to me, that's back to the trickster. Like, that's literally my Gemini moon. Like, I'm going to give you a bunch of facts and information, and I'm just going to say it over here. And now I know who you are and what you see based off of which one you grabbed onto. That was a fun game. Can we play again? Like, that's
well, I feel like that makes me think about like, just like on Twitter, like, you say something and somebody grabs onto like one part of it, you know, like that. And how I see you kind of handle that is like, oh, okay, that's what you grabbed onto. And maybe the healing part of that experience is like, just like that kind of mirror back, like send, or like, okay.
Making it
now
okay.
what?
Like, it's okay. Like,
Yeah.
that's what you saw, and that's okay. Yeah.
Exactly.
Totally, 1,000%. Always that.
Yeah.
You know, because I'm always just curious, you know? So it's like, oh, that's curious that's what you believe or think or see. And that's cool. You know, like, we can keep going with that. And I always tell everybody, like, especially if you're in a practice of healing or like what people are calling spirituality, it's like, oh, no, we don't have, nobody has to worry about it. There's no spiritual bypassing. That's not really real or true. We can still use that word, but you can't bypass shit in this reality like that. That's not real and true. It'll come back around. So we can play and use that word as a contextual tool, but it's not real and true, you know? So in time, we'll see what time it is for real. That's something I hold on to really, really tightly, if anything. I'm like, oh, I'll find out sooner or later.
Well, and it's like, we have consciousness, we have awareness, we have all these things that we have agency over, and we're in bodies. And like, we're just in bodies, and there's just certain, like, it's like gravity and these other things that you're, grounding us in, these, non-negotiable energies and rules and, restrictions that have to do with being in a body. So it's just another one of those paradoxes, I think, because it's true, it's painful, and sometimes it sucks, and sometimes you can't do anything about it. It's not okay to just say, it's just this. It's not, it's not okay to gloss over it. And in another sense, like in another place, and from certain places in awareness, it can be true that it's all okay. Whatever the thing is, that there is an okayness on some level too. And that's just another one of those paradoxes,
Right. Yeah. And I think people have resistance to that, right? Because like, if somebody's reading like Taoist texts, like their teachers were literally playing with they figured it out, literally playing with them. And then in other certain cultures and practices, people walk on nails and eat fire and levitate, like, and that's normal to them, to know that somebody has that capacity. But in the society that we're in right now, somebody be like, oh, you're spiritual bypassing, or blah, blah, blah. It's like, cool, like, that's what you see and that's how you feel, and that's cool. But like, the truth is the truth, and it doesn't care about your belief, and it doesn't care about my belief. And I'm down to see what the truth is. So I always invite that. And to me, just that in of itself has been really healing for me, because I don't have to hold on to anything so tight. Because it's like, if I hold on super tight and that thing wasn't true, then it pulls me away, right? And now I'm like being dragged down the street by an idea or a thought that I had. Really, I can just spaciousness.
This is making me think about like this idea of ontology, which is basically like, what is. And there's, over the last couple decades, there's been, well, less than that, there's been a movement within anthropology, which is like the discipline that I come from, to think about, ontology, think about ontology really seriously. In other words, like, think about like how different people literally just have a different concept of what is. And that's part of culture. Like, that's just the way that societies work. Like you have certain people who see things a certain way and other people who see things another way. And so when we talk about collectivity, we have to kind of like acknowledge that level of difference. And one of the things that's really interesting about looking at people that way across cultures is that consciousness is also like different in different places and in different times. And there's this really cool book called How Forests Think. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because of something that you said, Bethany, about like being in a body. And I think this language that we use is really kind of instructive for how we think about things, where we think about like being like I am in a body. It's like this I is something that's separate from the body and that I'm being placed in it. Like I am a consciousness within a body. Mm-hmm. And I think it's interesting in this book, like How Forests Think, it's a book about an Amazonian culture and just the way that they conceive of consciousness and how things happen. And that consciousness is not conceived there as something that's like a people thing. Mm-hmm. Consciousness is a world thing. Consciousness is like, a branch falls and you react to it. Like that is consciousness. It's not just like, I am perceiving the branch falling and I was scared by it. It's like, no, the branch falling was consciousness. Like there's this kind of interactivity between the self, or like, I mean, to the extent that we can even isolate a self from a world. But just this idea that we're always kind of situated in context, and that context is as much a part of us as I am me, if that makes sense.
Yeah, just stories upon stories upon stories, and it's just yeah.
So like
all of it, at some level.
Yeah. Well, a little tangent there, but I hope that.
Love it. I wrote it down. I want to listen to that book.
Yeah.
Well, as we're coming in for a landing, as Lauren likes to say, is there anything that's come up? I mean, there's every time each one of you spoke, and there's been like 4 threads that I would have wanted to pull. I feel like I could talk to you guys for like 10 hours. But is there anything that you notice wanting to say to feel kind of complete, or is there any kind of like, what would you want to leave people with? Either if they're thinking about astrology and how they might integrate this into their life, if they think it would be supportive and helpful, or just about the conversation that we've had and what we've been talking about around healing.
I guess I can start with it's like the system is not the answer. Like astrology or any system is not like, the answer is not there waiting for you to find it. Mm-hmm. And the answer is something that's like gonna come from collaborating with others, and that could be other people, or that could be like other people who've had ideas about the system, and then you're like connecting with those ideas. And I don't know, just back to this kind of trickster idea, like the answer is not just waiting there. It's something that you're always kind of you're always on the brink of the answer and always anticipating what the answer might be. But to really integrate astrology for me, like successfully, it has to come from a place of observation and realism and concreteness and using symbols in a way that kind of enlivens reality. But that doesn't mean that I have to like get the answer necessarily or have an end point. So there's that idea of like continuation and like always not just being and I am, but I am becoming, and the answer is always evolving.
No beginning and no end.
Yeah, totally.
Got it. I like that. Thank you.
And I would say, so the definition of heal, is to be whole. So just knowing, like, anytime that somebody's like, or you experiencing like, I'm healing, that's literally just your awareness of your completeness. So even though I said all these things around all this other stuff, at the end of the day, it is about the awareness, because the awareness is how the elements form into like being. All these other things happen because of consciousness in space. So just like having the awareness of I'm healing means that you inherently know that you're whole. Also, to think that you're broken means that you know that you are whole too, because you would have to, right? You like have to know that there's a piece of you missing, which means that you know you are still whole. So just be mindful of that, like anytime we come into like ideas in that way. So yeah, that's what I would say. And astrology can be a tool utilized to see that wholeness, depending on the type of astrologer you go to and talk to. And I always like to tell people now, because somebody told me recently, like, if you ask an astrologer a question and they don't answer it and can't answer it, it doesn't mean astrology can't answer it. It means there's another astrologer to look towards, always and forever. I really do believe that at this point in my life. So yeah, I just wanted to offer that up.
Well, the wholeness to me is related to the energetic of the okayness. Like, if you're holding your wholeness and knowing that that's true, then when someone says something to you on Twitter and gets reactive and says whatever they're saying, like, if you're in touch with that acceptance, that wholeness, then reactivity might not show up. There might not really be any problem there, and there might not be any pain from it. So that those feel connected on an energetic level, and that's what we say about maybe nothing needs to be healed, because maybe in our truest experience, like, there is wholeness, and that we can access that. We just forget, I think.
Totally. 1,000% agreed.
Yeah.
You're muted, sweet.
I like what Drew said about the system. Well, I might be interpreting it a little differently, but what I heard was like the system's an invitation to interdependence. And like, I just think that's like such an important, like, I wonder if that's a capital T truth versus a lower T truth of just the universe. And like that the system is just pointing us to be in relationship to the planets, which helps us be in relationship to the earth, which helps us be in relationship to ourselves, which helps us be in relationship to others, and be aware of that. And if the system is separate from that interdependence, then something's not in right relationship, and so that's really a beautiful way for me to believe, thinking about astrology.
Thank you for taking that idea, and that's a beautiful idea to come out of what I said. I really appreciate you feeling into that way.
You're good at that.
Well, this is one of my favorite podcasts we've done. I'm going to be honest. I felt like expanded and challenged. I really liked the dynamic of 4 people, and like just all the angles that brings up. I liked how much I came in as a learner, like, because I just, by the fact that I know so little about astrology. So yeah, thank you so much for being here and taking the time to be with us.
Yeah.
Thank you, Lauren. I feel really good.
Yeah, I'm super appreciating. I'm appreciating Cameron coming on blind, not knowing me and Lauren. And trusting the process and taking the invitation, being with us and sharing all your wisdom and your energy and everything that makes you you. And Drew, I adore, and I talk about it all the time to my friends. I feel really seen and understood by Drew, and I just feel you've been so generous. Even like the amount of mental energy, like there's a certain way that I know we're both the same rising sign, so you're noticing similar stuff, but I know you know my chart in your head. That feels loving. That feels so loving to me. And like, or like, hey, like texting me or calling me when something is happening. I've just felt like, so cared for.
Beautiful.
By you in experiencing you in your practice around this. So thank you.
Thanks, Bethany. I don't, I don't do that lightly, like that's what I love about about working with people on an ongoing basis, you know, like there's like, it is about that kind of personal investment in, you know, each other's well-being. And I always feel that with you too, where there's definitely a back and forth part of it, like where I'll come out of a session like feeling healed or like with a different perspective on something. And yeah, I love that. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a mark of a good astrologer right there, Drew. Like using astrology to like learn how to love in a like more like wholesome way. Like that's
yeah. Like what if I'm not the person? What if I'm not the person with the answer? You know, like what if we're kind of like learning to love each other? And man, yeah. So I guess maybe another thing about like going to see an astrologer is it's important to kind of hold on to your own power within that space, because a lot of times somebody will come in with you know, like wanting to find out from you as the astrologer, and like I can do that, but it'll probably be better for you if you also have like intention and purpose and like holding on to something for yourself that you can share, and we can like figure out how to share it together. So yeah.
Well, Lauren is ready to close. She has just entered the chat.
I can just go off video for a minute and come back, but like
Nature's
we're
calling.
in a situation
Yeah.
over here.
do your thing.
In its own way, nature's calling Lauren in a very specific way. There's often I'm like ready to end a podcast because I need to go pee, but it's been so lovely to be with both of you, and I'm so excited for some of your people to, I don't know, touch on some of my and Lauren's people, and I think there's like weird concentric circles overlapping, so it'll be kind of exciting to get feedback. I really would like to hear feedback from your communities as well, because I'd like to know what everybody thinks. So, and we like feedback-rich environments.
Thank you so much. I really am so honored to be with both of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Lauren.
Bye, y'all.
Bye.
Hey everybody, if you've got any feedback for us, we welcome it, or ideas about future guests, email us at healingcollectivepod@gmail.com. Our website is thehealingcollectivepodcast.com. We are at Healing Podcast on Twitter, and we are at Healing Collective Podcast on Instagram. Special thanks to Monda Creative, who edits all of our podcasts, and Two Tall Women Productions, who produce. Thank you.